I'm not a ranger, but my past isn't too far off. I was part of a secret group, something akin to scouts, but we preferred to remain anonymous. We were a band of adventurers who spent countless hours in the embrace of the woods. The wilderness was our playground, our classroom, and our home. We had our fair share of oddities, strange occurrences that sent chills down our spines. Most of these experiences had rational explanations, but there was one incident, one chilling memory, that still haunts me. A night of terror that remains etched in my mind. During my time as a group leader, I was responsible for different kinds of kids, usually between the ages of 8 and 16. We ran a large facility deep in the woods, and it took a lot of people to keep everything safe and operating smoothly. Managing a place like this involved so many moving parts. You never knew what some kid might stumble upon or get into. Besides the kids, there were local trailblazers and others who roamed the woods, making it crucial for us to be vigilant about who came and went from our property. As the leader for the 8 to 10-year-olds, my job was to ensure their safety, facilitate their learning, and, more importantly, guarantee they had fun. We looked forward to our annual camping trip, a time of bonding and adventure. This year was different, though. It was our first time in this new area, a vast stretch of wilderness that seemed to stretch endlessly. Normally, we'd scout the entire area before the kids arrived, marking potential hazards and mapping escape routes. But the sheer size of this place made it nearly impossible to do a thorough check. The camp facility was luxurious by our standards. Everyone stayed in cozy log cabins. We had a mess hall with running water and all the comforts of home. But the camping trips were different from the regular accommodations. The rangers and team leaders would gather their groups, pack everything we needed for the weekend on our backs, and trek deep into the wilderness. This is where the true camping experience began. We could teach the kids how to rough it, which was a huge part of the adventure. Every camp has its own traditions, and ours was no exception. One of our favorites was the night game, a thrilling yet terrifying activity where the kids had to complete tasks, while we, the leaders, dressed as monsters and lurked in the shadows, ready to jump out and scare them. This camp was no exception. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness crept in, we donned our monstrous disguises and hid among the trees, lying in wait for the kids to approach. There was a part of me that thought this might be a bad idea. Like I mentioned earlier, we hadn't thoroughly surveyed the area. The last thing we needed was for someone to fall off an unseen cliff or wander into a dangerous spot while searching for firewood. The south side of the camp had a big plateau, which had only recently been opened up after a logging operation cleared a path into the area. Despite my reservations, we decided to proceed with our planned activities. We had radios, first aid kits, and some basic protection gear, including machetes and a flare gun. I carried a belt knife everywhere, even to the bathroom. Unfortunately, we didn't have any real firearms, so our security was limited. The adults were instructed to protect the kids at any cost, and that was the mentality we all shared. As the game started, I found myself in an open part of the forest, a stretch with sparse foliage, perfect for a chase. I couldn't use my flashlight. Its beam would clearly give away my position. The darkness was unsettling, the kind that toys with your senses, making you think you see things that aren't really there. As I stood there, a shadow flitted past me several times. It was about my size, but I couldn't make out any details. I dismissed it as an animal, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Across the clearing, I saw the troop of kids preparing to make their way over to me. My plan was to jump out at the first kid who passed, chase the rest of them backward, and hopefully scare the one in the lead. Looking back, I realize I derived a little too much joy from the night games and those spooky activities. They were my chance to really scare the kids, call me mean, but it was a good time. As they began to cross the field, something startled them, and they suddenly darted back the way they came. I was left wondering what could have caused them to turn around. As I got ready to move out from my hiding spot, that same shadow from earlier passed by once more. This time, I got a better look at it and noticed it seemed to be weaving in and out of the branches. I kept my eyes on it while waiting for more kids to come. The shadows continued to flit in and out of my peripheral vision, but I paid them no mind, trying to shake off that uneasy feeling, attributing it to the adrenaline of the game and the eerie darkness surrounding me. But then I saw it again. This time it wasn't just a fleeting shadow, it was a figure. Someone was standing near a tree not too far away. My heart raced in my chest as I squinted through the darkness, trying to make out more details. It had to be another camp ranger because we were about the same size and height. I considered calling out for help, but realized it was probably another leader, and I didn't want to blow our cover. Instead, I waited until it looked like the figure was looking my way. Then I waved my arm. There was no response. I took a few steps closer and tried again, but that's when I got a good look at the figure. It was dressed strangely, its body draped in what looked like a torn burlap sack. Its head was covered with white plastic bags tied together in a makeshift mask. Its hands were bound, and it was on its knees, rhythmically banging its head against the tree trunk. The sound echoed throughout the silent forest, a chilling noise that sent shivers down my spine. How had I not heard this before? At first, I thought it was some kind of prank from the camp leaders, but I quickly realized I was wrong. I didn't know this person. I watched as they continued to hit their head against the tree a few more times before I decided I should intervene. A shiver ran down my spine as I thought it was one of the leaders pulling some sort of prank. But something felt off. The figure was too still, too silent, apart from that rhythmic thudding against the tree. "Hey!" I called out, my voice echoing among the trees. Once again, there was no response. The thudding sound continued. As I moved closer, aiming my flashlight directly at the figure, I could see the mud caked on their bare feet and the strange way their hands were bound. I called out once more, telling them to knock it off. Suddenly, the thudding stopped. The figure slowly rose to its feet, turning to face me. I froze, feeling my blood turn to ice in my veins. The figure began walking toward me, moving slowly and deliberately. Panic gripped me, a primal instinct screamed at me to run. I turned on my heel and sprinted back toward the camp, the figure's footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't dare look back, my mind was filled with images of that strange, silent figure in the woods, those plastic bags on its face. The whole situation was beyond creepy. As I continued to sprint, I realized the footsteps were no longer following me. I burst onto the trail and encountered a couple of campers. I took a look behind me and saw nothing, no sign of that person I had just seen. This was a relief, but in a way, it scared me even more. The fact that I didn't know where they were meant they could be anywhere, and that didn't sit well with me. This was truly a nightmare for the jobs I had, and I wasn't handling it well. I assured the kids back at camp that everything was fine as I dashed through the woods. I burst into the camp, gasping for breath. The other leaders were huddled around the fire, and I looked around, relieved to see everyone accounted for. I told them about the figure and that strange encounter, but they all laughed it off, thinking I was just trying to scare them. But I knew what I had seen. "Did any of you see anything strange?" I asked the kids I had brought with me. Of course, they hadn't been with me during the run-in. They all shook their heads, further reinforcing the idea that I was just lying to them. Feeling defeated, I let it go. I was literally out of options, and all I could do was keep an eye on the camp. Thank goodness nothing weird happened for the rest of that night. The next day, I returned to the spot with another leader. The tree stood there, silent and imposing, but there was something else. A small, skinny rabbit was nailed to the tree, its lifeless eyes staring right at us. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stared at the grim sight. How could something so cruel happen in our camp? We decided to call the police, but when they arrived, they brushed it off as some sort of prank. They explained that college kids often went mushroom hunting in the area and were known for going on psychedelic benders. Every summer, they received calls about half-naked people running around the woods, especially in this region. The camp leaders offered another explanation. This was a place for troubled youth, and it was possible that someone from a nearby camp had come over to mess with us. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than just some prankster. The unsettling memory of that figure lingered in my mind, a persistent echo of fear that refused to fade. As the day passed, I kept glancing back toward the trees, feeling a lingering sense of unease. The woods seemed different somehow, as if they were watching me, waiting. That night, we resumed our activities, but my heart wasn't in it. I had trouble shaking off the feeling that something was out there, something dangerous. The kids went to bed early, excited from the day's adventures. The adults sat around the campfire, sharing stories and laughing, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't shake the image of that figure, the head banging against the tree, the vacant stare, the plastic bags. I found myself drifting in and out of conversation, lost in my thoughts. Just as I was about to excuse myself and go to bed, the laughter from the campfire subsided. A rustling sound in the bushes drew our attention. Everyone fell silent, their eyes darting toward the source of the noise. I felt my heart race as I instinctively reached for my knife. What was that? One of the leaders whispered, breaking the silence. Just the wind, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the wind. The rustling continued, louder this time, followed by a low growl. Maybe it's just a deer, another leader suggested. But I could feel the tension in the air, the kind that made every hair on your body stand on end. Without warning, a figure burst out from the bushes, and I could barely make out what it was in the dim light. My heart dropped as I saw the burlap sack and the plastic bags. The figure was back. I jumped to my feet, yelling, "Get the kids! Everyone inside!" The camp erupted into chaos as everyone scrambled to their feet. The laughter turned into screams as the figure began to approach. I grabbed a nearby flashlight and shone it toward the figure. It paused, the beam illuminating its twisted face. The eyes were hollow, and the plastic bags were pulled tight around its head, distorting its features into something grotesque. "Who are you?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure took a step closer, its hands still bound, and the growling grew louder. I backed up slowly, urging the others to follow. We were all huddled together, fear gripping us as we watched the figure advance. Suddenly, another leader, a burly man named Derek, stepped forward. "I'll take care of this," he said, brandishing a machete. "Wait!" I shouted, but it was too late. Derek charged toward the figure, swinging the machete with a fierce determination. The figure stumbled back, but Derek's bravado only seemed to provoke it further. "Get away from them," he yelled, but as he swung the machete again, the figure dodged to the side with surprising agility. The chaos that ensued was unreal. The rest of us fled to the cabins, panic setting in as we rushed to lock the doors. I kept glancing back, watching Derek confront the figure. I felt torn between helping my friend and getting the kids to safety. Just as I was about to turn back and join the fray, a piercing scream rang out. I whipped around in horror, and my heart dropped as I saw Derek go down, the figure now on top of him, clawing at his face. "No!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. I rushed back to the scene, knife in hand, but all I could do was watch as the figure seemed to overpower Derek, dragging him into the bushes. The sound of Derek's struggle was heart-wrenching. The others had barricaded themselves in the cabins, but I couldn't abandon him. I charged toward the chaos, yelling for Derek. But as I drew closer, I could see that it was too late. The figure had vanished into the darkness, taking Derek with it. The camp descended into silence. The laughter and chatter from earlier were replaced by an oppressive stillness. I staggered back, overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. Where had they gone? What had I just witnessed? I stumbled into the nearest cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. Once inside, I quickly locked the door and turned to the kids huddled in the corner. Their eyes were wide with fear, reflecting the same terror that gripped my heart. I tried to reassure them, but my voice wavered. "Everything will be okay," I said, though I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. "We'll wait here until morning." We all stayed silent, the darkness pressing in around us. I felt the weight of the situation pressing down, the knowledge that something horrible had just happened. I had no idea how to keep the kids safe or what the figure had wanted. Hours passed in tense silence. The kids tried to sleep, but I stayed awake, straining to hear any sound outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was still out there, watching us. Finally, as dawn began to break, a knock came at the door. I jumped, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice shaky. "It's me, Derek," came a muffled voice from the other side. Relief flooded through me, and I quickly unlatched the door. As I opened it, I was met with Derek, bloodied but alive. I rushed to him, hugging him tightly, but he pushed me away, his eyes wild. "They took me. We need to get out of here." "What do you mean? Who took you?" I asked, my heart racing. Derek looked around, panic evident in his expression. "I don't know. I woke up in the woods, tied to a tree. I barely managed to escape, but I think they're still out there." We quickly gathered the kids and explained the situation. They were frightened, but listened intently. "We need to leave now," I said, my voice steady. "Pack whatever you can carry, we're heading back to camp." We grabbed our things and made our way out, but as we stepped into the daylight, the atmosphere felt different. The woods, which had once felt like a comforting refuge, now loomed ominously around us. Every sound seemed amplified, and every rustle of leaves sent shivers down my spine. As we moved cautiously through the trees, we spotted signs of struggle, a broken branch, disturbed leaves, and an unsettling feeling of being watched. My heart raced with each step. Were we being followed? Just as we reached the edge of the clearing, I heard a faint rustling behind us. I turned around, scanning the trees, but nothing was there. "Keep moving," I urged, trying to mask my fear. We were so close to safety, but it felt like we were still in grave danger. We finally reached the main camp, where I quickly reported the incident to the authorities. They took us seriously this time and organized a search for the figure. But as the days passed, the search yielded no results. The campers were sent home, and the camp was closed for the rest of the summer. I tried to shake off the unsettling memories, but I knew I could never truly escape what happened that night. The figure, with its hollow eyes and plastic mask, had left an indelible mark on my mind. I thought about Derek often, and I knew he felt the same way. Weeks turned into months, and as fall approached, The nights grew longer and darker. I still had nightmares about the figure. Some nights, I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that I was still being hunted. Eventually, I sought help for my anxiety. I talked to therapists and attended group sessions, but nothing seemed to ease the burden I carried. The trauma of that night lingered, leaving me feeling unsettled and anxious. One chilly evening, while sitting by a fire, I finally decided to confront my fears. I couldn't let this experience rule my life. I gathered a few trusted friends and planned a trip back to the site of the camp. It was time to face the past and reclaim my sense of safety. As we arrived, the air was thick with tension. The trees loomed overhead, and I felt that familiar sense of dread wash over me. My friends were supportive, encouraging me to take it step by step. We set up camp in the same area where the incidents had occurred, determined to confront whatever haunted us. That first night, we sat around the fire, sharing stories and reminiscing about the past. I felt a sense of camaraderie with my friends, but the shadows in the trees reminded me of what had happened. As darkness fell, I kept glancing into the woods, half expecting to see that figure lurking in the shadows. We took turns keeping watch throughout the night, but nothing seemed to happen. The air was still, and the forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. Just as I began to relax, a faint sound echoed through the trees, something that made my heart race. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to my friends, my heart pounding in my chest. They nodded, their faces pale with fear. We listened intently, the sounds growing closer. It was a rhythmic thudding, just like I had heard before. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "We need to check it out," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the woods, the beams of light cutting through the darkness. The thudding sound grew louder, and I could feel my heart racing with each step we took. What if the figure was back? What if we weren't safe here? We followed the sound until we reached a small clearing. What we saw sent chills down my spine. There, in the moonlight, was a tree with something hanging from its branches, a burlap sack. "No, this can't be happening," I murmured, dread pooling in my stomach. We moved closer, and the air grew heavy with tension. As we approached the sack, I noticed something tied to it. A piece of paper fluttered in the breeze, and my hands trembled as I reached for it. With shaking fingers, I unfolded the note, my heart pounding as I read the words scrawled in a jagged hand. "You should have never come back. The woods belong to us." Panic surged through me, and I dropped the note, backing away. "We need to leave now," I shouted, my voice breaking with fear. But just as we turned to run, the woods erupted with laughter, high-pitched, maniacal laughter echoing through the trees. I felt like I was back in that nightmarish moment, surrounded by shadows and darkness. "Run!" I yelled, adrenaline pushing me forward as we bolted through the trees. The laughter followed us, growing louder, and the sounds of something crashing through the underbrush fueled our fear. We sprinted toward the camp, the distant lights flickering like a beacon of safety. But the darkness seemed to close in around us, branches grabbing at our clothes, as if trying to pull us back into the depths of the woods. Finally, we reached the campsite, breathless and terrified. We locked ourselves inside the cabin, hearts pounding in unison. "What was that?" One of my friends gasped, still gasping for breath. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "But we can't stay here. We need to get out." As we packed our things, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced out the window, but the woods were eerily quiet now. It felt like a trap, the calm before the storm. Once everything was in the car, we drove away as fast as we could, the headlights cutting through the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were alive, that something sinister was lurking just beyond the tree line. Months passed, and I tried to move on, but the experience haunted me. The laughter, the burlap sack, the note, it all played in my mind like a twisted movie reel. I learned to cope, attending therapy and talking to friends. I tried to reclaim my sense of safety, but deep down, I knew I would never be the same. The woods held secrets I couldn't uncover, and the figure would always remain a part of my past. Even as I tried to leave it behind, the memories lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were still watching, that the laughter echoed in the silence. And somewhere out there, I knew the figure was waiting, lurking in the shadows, ready to return when I least expected it. The fear, the uncertainty, it would always be a part of me, a reminder that some things in the dark should never be disturbed.